All right, November research review. I'm excited about this one because the first one's kind of controversial. I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of disappointed because I really, really, I really want to hack to work so bad, but I'm afraid that it's not what I felt it was going to be. However, I'll let you dive into the study before I make any conclusions. But Brandon, welcome to the podcast once again. Why don't you break down the first study for us, and then we can kind of just dive into it, and I'll throw some questions your way.
Yeah, so we have two studies, both focused on sleep. So we're hardcore into sleep in November for some reason. But no, I picked this study because it's relatively new, but I get a lot of questions about sleep, blue light glasses, melatonin, jet lag, pretty much anything sleep related. And I've never like formally done any research on sleep, but it's always been like in the back of my mind. I've wanted to do stuff, so I'm trying to figure out how I can do it now. But part of doing research is understanding the background of it. So this is, mutually beneficial to listeners and myself. Okay, so the first study is all about social jet lag. And social jet lag is the difference between when you wake up on like the weekends, for example, and the work week. So if you had high social jet lag, you would sleep in like 2 hours on the weekends. And, say weekdays you wake up at 7, weekends you wake up at 9. So that would be considered high or, moderately high. If you had low social jet lag, which would kind of indicate that you weren't sleep deprived at all, you hadn't accumulated any sleep debt over the week from working or, trying to get all your stuff done, you'd wake up around the same time as you do on the work days. So again, wake up during the week at 7, maybe you wake up on the weekends at like 7:30 or something. So this study recruited people with high social jet lag. They had at least an hour and a half. And there are actually two studies within this overarching manuscript. The first one is on blue light blocking glasses, which I covered on Instagram if you want to get into the nitty gritty of each study and kind of how I've accumulated the evidence that I've found. And the second part of this study was on sleeping with the curtains open, which is super practical. It's like, okay, you just don't shut your curtains at night. And if you don't live in a city, that could work pretty well. So in the first study, they basically had these participants, young 20s, kind of normal people, probably college age, sleep for 2 weeks with just kind of monitoring sleep. And then they had them randomized to either a control group, which had glasses that didn't block blue light, but were like tinted, so they look like they did. And then glasses that did block blue light. And they measured sleep onset, so like what time they fell asleep. The idea being that if you're jet lagged and you can fall asleep earlier, you can recover some of that sleep debt. So that would be a good thing. And then they also measured sleep time, so just like general amount of sleep. And they also measured something else called dim light melatonin onset. And I want to kind of explain that before I get into the results, because it's kind of neat. Because what happens is about 2 hours before you go to sleep, and this generally goes with light outside. So as it gets dark, you start producing melatonin, and that makes you drowsy. So normal people say you go to bed at 10, your DLMO is the short name for it, or acronym, would start around 8 p.m. So they kind of go hand in hand. So you would hope that you get sleepy, your DLMO is earlier, and so on. So what the study basically found was after 2 weeks of wearing these blue light blocking glasses, there was a trend for sleeping longer by about 15 to 16, 17 minutes, somewhere there. Very like minuscule difference. The variability was pretty high. I think it was like 30, the standard deviation was like 30 minutes. So that tells us there's a lot of, it depends on the person, maybe some of the other factors that we don't know about, like whether they played on their phones or things like that, or maybe listening to music before bed. So what they found was blue light blocking glasses slept about 17 minutes longer, which is good, trend, but not significant. And they also during the first week of wearing their glasses fell asleep about 30 minutes before they usually would, which is good, right? That's how you're going to recover some of that sleep debt, assuming you wake up at the same time. But in the second week, that kind of got cut in half and was no longer significant. Kind of saying to me, you know, blue light glasses helped, but maybe we either adapted or something else happened where it was kind of just variance around the mean. So the DLMO data, melatonin data, matched this sleep onset really, really well. Like it was like 30 minutes exactly, and then about 15 minutes. So that says, well, physiologically, there's something going on, but maybe this study was a little underpowered, or these people, you know, didn't have a very large effect. So it's hard to find significant differences there. But ultimately, the blue light blocking glasses didn't really do too much. So that's the first part of it. If you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I think that most people assume one that you would get longer than 10 to 15 minutes of sleep because of the blue light blocking glasses. And then I think people, the only argument I could see for people, and you kind of, I mean, they tested this with different variables too, but a lot of people argue, well, it's not about how long you get because of them, it's how deep the sleep is, right? And this kind of shows that that might not be the case either. How much efficacy or how much research is really like good research is put into the negative effects of blue light in the first place? The reason I'm wondering is because obviously blue light blocker glasses might have been a little hyped up, and it's easy to do that with grabbing this and then making a bunch of marketing saying like, hey, it improved the duration of sleep, and now people can jump on that. They don't look into the finer details. Nobody's buying the glasses, but searching PubMed first. Um,
Yeah.
so do you think that might have been the case with blue light? Like maybe blue light's not as big of a deal as some of these companies or people marketed, or is blue light something we actually do need to avoid?
So I would say whether we need to avoid it or not, you know, close to bed, it probably wouldn't hurt. But there are a couple studies that actually like give blue light and then measure physiological measures. And that's how this all kind of came about, is like people blocked off. It's a really, really cool like series of experiments. They blocked off different color spectrums until they figured out that blue light was the one that caused melatonin shifts and sleep problems, and you know, mostly in like people with big time sleep issues with insomnia and things like that. But it's definitely a problem. We just don't know how to fix it exactly, or
Okay.
if we need to fix it and how much that matters. So there's a lot of kind of details people are still trying to work out, for sure.
I mean, my assumption would, I've always thought that like we've adapted. So I wouldn't be surprised if we adapted to blue light to an extent to where it's not as significant as it would be for somebody who is a caveman who first gets introduced to electricity. You know, like that might be a shock to the system. Um, but no, that makes sense. I've also heard a claim from somebody who is in the blue light blocking industry that talked about jet lag from travel and how using blue light blockers can help fight that for people who are traveling quite often. But I mean, would you say that this kind of breaks that down too and kind of defies that myth?
Um, well, I think they're slightly different, um, because so jet lag is the mismatch between your internal and external clocks, right? So the like the sun clock and your, you know, biological clock. Um, when you travel, I think there's other factors that play a role, and I'm just not sure that it's like easy as wearing blue light blocking glasses and it just fixing it. Um, I always tell my athletes or former athletes, when they travel, there's going to be a first night effect. So the first night they get somewhere, they're going to probably sleep less. The quality is probably going to be crap. So if you have a competition, right, that's a good rationale to go a day early. And most pro athletes go much earlier than that. Like the Olympic people are there for like a month before they compete, so they can adapt to the environment. But for normal people, you know, that's not really feasible. So, I mean, it could have an effect, but I would lean towards no right now for flying too.
Yeah, that makes sense. And even like I know for me, if I'm doing like speaking at a seminar event, I always try to get there 1 to 2 days early. Partially as selfishly, I just want more vacation time. But
Yeah.
the other part of me is like I know that if I like land, because I've had to do it where I land at after 6 p.m. and then I wake up the next day and I'm presenting, and it's just difficult, right? If I can wake up, have basically the full day, or like land at like 6 in the morning and then spend all day there, get a good night's sleep, then wake up and present, it's so much easier.
Mhm.
Um, Before I ask any more questions, because I do have a couple more that I want to dive into this, do you want to kind of finish breaking down what you have left of the study?
Yeah. So in the second part of the study, same kind of design where they used two groups, but all they did was have people leave their curtains open, and they wanted to see if this changed when they woke up, DLMO or sleeping time, and it didn't literally do anything. I was always kind of the mindset that if you, because our body's entrained to the sun, right? So we're very light based people. So if you open your like blinds, you get light, you get out in the mornings, you get some light, that would be beneficial. But at least in terms of sleep onset and melatonin, in this study, they didn't find anything. These were, I will caveat that and say, these people were already sleeping pretty good. And I think when we talk about sleep, the difference between sleeping 5 hours a night and trying to improve and sleeping even like 6.5 hours a night and trying to improve is like huge, right? So if I'm going from 7 hours a night to 8 hours a night, I may not notice that much. But if I'm going from 6 to 7, then I'm like, oh, okay, that's a big difference.
So there's kind of like that threshold.
Yeah, there's definitely a threshold effect. And they've done a couple of dose response studies, like had people sleep for 4 hours, 6 hours, and 8 hours. It seems to be right around 6 hours. Is like less than six is kind of risky.
Hmm. Yeah, I've seen. I want to say I don't know if it was after doing the podcast or if they broke it down on the podcast because I've had a couple people. I had Greg Potter on, and then I had
Mhm.
I'm losing my train of thought on her name, but another sleep scientist on. And if I remember correctly, it was kind of like if you get less than 7, you're kind of screwed. But the only benefit you're going to get above 7 is like you got to sleep over 9. And then they saw like an improvement and I think the study was on high performance athletes too. So we have to take that into consideration. If they're playing and training, so activity multiple times a day, they're busy, they're moving, they're traveling. Like, of course, more sleep's going to be better.
Yeah, and with the athletes, that's kind of my interpretation of the literature too. It's you need to recover because you've been working your butt off all day and
Yeah,
not sit in a chair like we tend to do.
yeah. Is there any? I remember you mentioned to me when I was talking to you about this outside of the podcast that there might be like a benefit to the strain placed on your eyes if you're
Hmm.
staring at a screen for a long time. So maybe not necessarily like, hey, wear these blue light blockers and you're going to sleep 10 times better or longer, which I will say this is just example of the placebo effect. I interviewed somebody who owns a blue light blocking glasses company, and he also does some like alcohol prevention, sober retreat stuff that was really cool that we talked about as well. And he sent me some free glasses. So of course I'm like, I'm going to wear them.
Yeah.
And I swore I slept so much better when I was wearing those things. And my wife gave me shit because I'm wearing these like dorky orange glasses every night. But I swear I slept better. And then what I noticed is when we moved, I forgot to pull them back out and I kept sleeping totally fine. So what had happened was I like seeing those on my nightstand gave me like the cue to be like, oh wait, put my phone away, like
Mhm.
put these on. It's time to wind down because I always go upstairs and change into like comfy clothes, and I'd see them, and by then it's 7 p.m. starting to get dark. I'm like, oh, perfect. Um,
Yeah.
and so like if I reflect back, it was almost like they gave me accountability to have a better nighttime routine. Is really what was
Yeah.
going on, and that's something the sleep scientists I interviewed really swore by was that nighttime routine.
I definitely agree there. And this study would kind of indicate that a little bit, right? It's like the first week it has a 30-minute effect and you get a little bit of a sleep bump. But then the second week it kind of disappears. And so maybe it is just them like adapting either to the blue light or the cues or whatever and saying, okay, we need to get our stuff together. We're going to study. Or you're an athlete and you get a pair of glasses and you're like, okay, let me try this for a couple weeks and just fixes things for a while. So
Yeah.
I don't know. There are a lot of cool designs that could be done where you like give people glasses and then you take them away, and then you give them, stuff like that.
And as far as the strain on the eyes, is there?
Oh yeah, yeah. So that evidence is pretty firm. Like all the studies I've looked at in the realm of eye strain, they really do help with eye strain. Like not, and that's as little as like wearing them for 2 hours. So I think the studies range from like 2 to 10 hours, which is, like typical workday, I guess. Um, so yeah, I would say if you ask me, do they help eye strain? I'd say yes. And ask me if they help sleep, I'm like maybe.
So, what are the consequences of eye strain? So, are we just talking like frequent headaches? Are we talking lack of concentration? Like, what happens if you have strain in your eyes?
Yeah, so it's mostly most people complain about like blurry vision, right? You stare at the screen too long, you're like,
Hmm.
ugh.
Or your eyes start
Uh,
watering?
yeah. You can get dry eyes. Headaches are very common. Like, not like a super duper physio person, but those are the general things that I've heard of and have kind of read about.
Okay. Yeah, that's typically the only time I wear them now is like if I know I'm going to be sitting in front of the computer for a long time. Um, I'll rock the clear ones so I don't have like change. Everything becomes orange, obviously, but
Yeah.
at least it's somewhat of a dimmer to that blue light. Um, cool. I have a couple random questions that kind of relate, kind of don't. But do you have anything left you want to point out on the study before I ask those and we move on?
No, I don't really think so. There is one, so in the realm of the study, there is one meta-analysis that kind of looks at blue light and all of the things you would care about. So eye strain, sleep, things like that. And it's really mixed. There's no like definite like, yes, the blue light definitely helps with all of these things, except for eye strain. So I don't know. I'm so hopeful, and then I get so sad.
That's what I was saying. Like I want to hack so
Yeah.
bad, but there's really no hacks. Um, okay, cool. So I mean, the conclusion on this one is basically like there might be a benefit from an eye strain perspective. So if you're staring at a screen for a long time, you might want to wear them. But other than that, the not only are the results short-lived, but they're not that significant. So
Yeah.
you're probably not going to notice much. And some of these blue light blockers are $100 or more. So this
Oh
is,
man.
I mean, you can get so like, and you can get cheap ones on Amazon. But I've
Mhm.
gotten cheap ones on Amazon, and then I used they have these things online that you can do like you can test the glasses. So there's like this color scale and without them, I can see all the colors. When you put them on, it should block out some of the colors because some of the colors are made through blue light. And I've used really nice ones, and it does block them out. Granted, obviously it's not doing too much for me sleep-wise. And I put the cheap ones on, and it doesn't do shit. It's just orange glasses. So you got to be careful. And if you're going to get blue lights, you actually do have to actually spend a little bit of money, but it might not be something you really need.
Yeah, there's some so part of my Instagram this week is looking at the glasses, and there's a couple studies that compare glasses, and like some of these glasses are only blocking 15% of blue light, and you're like, okay, well that's probably not enough to do much. So like you said, you probably need some glasses that actually block blue light.
Yeah. One of the questions I had is for night shift workers. So,
Mhm.
do you think any results in this would be different if we were using it with them? Because I got to imagine their social jet lag is all screwed up. Like it's on a whole nother level because of those swings. And if not, what are your recommendations that you usually tell people? Because it's a very touchy subject because a lot of times people say like, well, what do I do if this? I'm like, well, get a new job. And they're like, okay, that's an
Yeah,
option. I'm like, okay, well, if that's not an option, I mean, one, stop training so hard on the days you have 10-hour shifts 3 days in a row. Like take those as rest days. Like, we got to focus on nutrition. You might need to implement some intermittent fasting, just not really intermittent fasting, but more like having set meal times to keep your circadian
yeah.
rhythm in check. But do you have any recommendations? Have you dug into the research on this at all?
Not too much. So I honestly like tell people if you're working night shift, you want to do everything within your power to get off of it relatively quickly. Like a year or two of night shift's not terrible, but when you go past that, you look at any like disease outcome and it is terrible. Like these people are just prone to everything. But, like you said, exercise seems to help a little bit, kind of regulate your chronobiology. Nutrition, timing it as needed. I haven't dug into chrononutrition a whole lot, but I think Stronger by Science has a good chrononutrition article. And then
I also interviewed Danny Lennon on here for
oh, okay.
chrononutrition right after the Stronger by Science article came out. So we can link the article from them and our interview with him. Really good podcast.
Yeah, no, I like Danny a lot. But in the realm of night shift work, like I would say do everything, even if you just get like a placebo, or like I would actually recommend, hey, we're not sure blue light blocking glasses work, but for you, it's worth the $100 because for the glasses, because it's a risk, right? But for like me, I'm like, my sleep's pretty good anyway. I probably don't need them. So yeah, I think when you get into extreme situations, and night shift working is definitely one of them, you have to kind of bend the rules a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm sure this study would be, I mean, maybe it wouldn't be super significant if that was the case, but I'm sure if they took this study and did it with all people who work swing shifts or night shifts or long hours like that, maybe it would have made a slight difference, because I know so my sister-in-law and her husband, which would be my brother-in-law, because it's my wife's brother-in-law, but they're both police officers, and they work crazy shifts. Like we were there visiting them, and I think one of them went to bed at like 5 a.m. Like she stayed up way past us because she was like, well, I don't work tomorrow, but if I don't stick to my sleep schedule, I'm all screwed up. So she stayed up till 5, went to sleep, and then woke up at like noon, right? And like was with us. So it was like really weird, but that's like the only way to keep it regulated. So I can imagine like for her, maybe using them might be beneficial, but
yeah, it's worth trying. Like that's in those situations, it's worth trying a little bit outside of scientific means, I would say.
I think I've asked you this before, but how do you like decide what you're gonna dig into research wise? Like do you like say like, all right, like I'm gonna, every day I pick something that I'm gonna do, or like for the next month I'm really gonna focus on all the research on this, like just because I've yet to stump you with anything on the podcast or off. Like anytime I ask you something, it seems like you have some kind of study to back it up, or something about it, which is just mind blowing.
Yeah. So I learned early in my PhD, the person who knows the literature the best always wins the arguments, no matter who you're arguing with. And it was taught to me by like the senior postdoc. And she's like, no, if you just read and memorize stuff, you can like always know most stuff. But I write a lot, right? We do podcasts, we do blogs. The coaches are constantly asking me something, right? I've got like 2 emails from coaches in my inbox now that I need to respond to. I do my own research, which is not within the realm of like sleep or blue light blocking glasses, or really even nutrition for that matter. I've got a couple nutrition studies. So I just get exposed to a lot of different things, which makes me read a lot. I probably read, I don't know, 3 studies a day.
Are you allowed to talk about the studies that you do because of the circumstance you do them in?
Nope.
So those kind of studies don't get released into like PubMed or ResearchGate or anything like that?
No, which is kind of unfortunate if you're looking to do stuff later, because you have like no record of, hey, I did this cool thing that I can't talk about.
Yeah. I read a study about this is a long time ago, and it popped up on the Journal of International Sports Science Nutrition, JISSN.
Yeah.
And it's funny you talked about like you just kind of have this routine. Like I had this routine where like almost every morning I would open, like if Mass had a new one, I would open that and then I'd go through all those. And then I would go to JISSN because it's just a database full of studies and interpretations. And I really like when they have people that come and do, I can't remember what it's called, but it would be like a meal timing, and it's like all these people come in and kind of give their opinion of the research that they've seen over the years. It's not a meta-analysis, but I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah, it's just like it's almost like an opinion of experts.
Yeah, exactly. But I used to just thumb through that. Like every morning I just click it and like, all right, I'm going to pick one. I'm going to read through it. And I read one about nootropics, and I want to say it was the participants of the study were snipers. I don't know if it was from the army or if it was like competition sniping, like, but it was like basically placebo, nothing, or nootropic supplement. And the nootropic was actually on its Alpha Brain, which is a well-known company. So I don't
Yeah.
know if they funded the study and then it kind of bit them in the ass, because there was no significant changes whatsoever in anything.
Yeah.
Which to me, I was reading, I'm like, man, like that's crazy, because nootropics is a big field. That's a big brand. I do take nootropics, and I have them sitting on the counter right here.
Nice.
And I feel like they help me. So I'm like, okay, was it just a bad brand, or are these snipers so elite that they would need something more powerful than that to change their focus, because their focus is so dialed in already? Like, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy. I don't know if you have opinions on that, but
Um, the they are elite athletes. I will say that. I've always been kind of skeptical, but now I would tell you straight up, any like ranger, special ops, anybody, like they are elite athletes. So they need things that normal people don't need.
mhm. Yeah,
So
I when I was visiting family the other weekend, he used to do I don't know what they're called, but they're like, they put out forest fires. Like they're the guys that like
oh,
are in the like mountains of the forest when the fires are going up, and they're like in the trenches putting them out, and it's like brutal. In fact, what's the guy that does? He has the book Can't Hurt Me. He was on Joe Rogan a bunch.
oh man, I
He's
don't.
like a Navy SEAL, and he also like runs
Oh,
marathons and everything. Super hardcore.
I think was it Jocko Willick? Was that
No, Jocko is a badass.
okay?
But
Yeah, he is. I've read his books.
yeah,
Okay.
it is David Goggins.
Okay.
So um, David Goggins does that for fun. He volunteers. Like literally, he
Jeez.
goes. Like I heard Joe talking about this. He literally, like in the summer, because he's bored, will go volunteer for that. And it's like one of the most dangerous, unrecognized professions that you can do. But my brother-in-law did that. He's part SWAT. He's the sheriff and all that stuff. And when I was shooting with him, like seeing him talk about it and handle the gun and do all these things is just wild. And like you said, like people don't consider that an athlete, but he's definitely an elite athlete. Like it's
Yeah.
kind of crazy how they approach things.
It's cool. It's not what you would normally think of, which is
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So next study is still on the train of sleep, um, which I'm excited to get in this one, because I think it's the opposite of what most people think about. Usually people are thinking, how does sleep affect training, not how does training affect sleep? And I think this can kind of pigeonhole into a couple conversations around nutrition as well. But I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so this is a pretty simple study. This is a randomized crossover. So basically, you do one thing, and then hopefully you have like a washout period, and you do the other thing. In this case, it was either training to failure or not training to failure, and not training to failure was with 2 reps in reserve. So not a hard workout, but not an easy one. And what they did was 4 sets of 10 of 75% of 1RM. Which is kind of interesting when you mix 1RM work with RPE work, because they don't always match up. But again, failure or non-failure, bench press and half squats, not full squats, half squats. And then, so they had a workout, and then they measured sleep parameters. So they did sleep quality, actigraphy, they did heart rate variability, which is just the time between heartbeats. And I will have to do a HRV study at some point in our series, because it's super cool. And then next day they did a 1RM of bench press and half squat. So, which is kind of weird, but anyway.
Why half squat?
Probably because it's easier to do and do
Load.
in a study. Yeah, and load. Like you don't have to worry. There's a lot less risk, put it that way, and it
Yeah.
does transfer really well for athletes.
Yeah. And I guess too, like you got to think about, if we have a bunch of people and half of them can squat really, really well, ass to grass, and half of them can't, it kind of throws another variable into the study. So that makes sense.
Yeah. So kind of weird, but a lot of people do it. And basically, what they found was no differences between failure and non-failure on anything sleep related or HRV related. As you can kind of imagine, if you went to failure and the next day you 1RM'd, you did worse than like your previous 1RM. compared to the non-failure group. So that was kind of the like duh finding of the study. But those are, those are always needed. Just proof of concept is what we call them. And so when I picked this study, I was really excited and I read it and I analyzed it and I was like, this is lame. But it's really important that we cover studies that don't have like what we call significant findings, right? Because this is called publication bias or the file drawer effect, where a lot of journals won't publish as much stuff. If they're getting better, a lot of journals are getting better, but they won't publish as much findings that are non-significant. So you compare two things and they're not different. Whoop-de-doo, right? But then you have like grad students and young investigators and whoever doing studies that have already been done and finding like, hey, there's no difference, but nobody ever published it. So we repeated it and now we're not going to publish it either. So somebody else is going to do it again. So it's a huge waste of time and resources. But that's just my little rant on publication bias.
I think there's a lot of, I mean, a study has like a marketability to it too, so like when we consider headlines of podcasts, of blogs, of articles, of journals, like everybody's fighting for attention in today's age because of social media and marketing and business and everything. And this is something I study quite a bit because it's my job to know how to get people's attention. But
Yeah.
I think that's the thing is like, who's the best publication? Who's the best research review? Like we have to pick studies that intrigue people, so if there's not a significant difference, and this is why, like I always say, the more science I learn and the more I talk to people like you, the more I realize how simple body composition changes really are, right? Because it really comes down to like caloric balance. Like keto came out and it was like this huge thing. And then after like a few years of actual studies coming out, oh, it's just calorie deficit. Intermittent fasting, oh, just calorie deficit, right? Like paleo, oh, just calorie deficit. And there's no like, yeah, you got food intolerances. Sometimes you might have a upset stomach, but like, it's not like none of these things are hyped up as much as that we thought. And part of it is because the marketability of extremism is huge. If I can make a claim that is like kind of scary or triggers you, like you're going to read
Yeah.
it. So, which is why the title of this podcast will probably be blue light blockers are bullshit. And people,
Any writing I've ever done, I always suck at that part, like the headline part. I'm just like, I can't do it. I'm just terrible.
that's
Somebody else take care of it for me.
that's why I still always have the final edit on any blog that goes out on the website, no matter who on the team
Nice.
writes it, because it's something I've studied. I've studied copywriting a lot and
Yeah.
powerful headlines, and I've done courses on it. And it's actually funny, man. Like it's as you grow in your profession, your interests kind of change depending on where your role goes. And I think like mine more than a lot of people, my role has changed so much over the years because it was like I was just a trainer, and then I was a trainer and nutritionist, and then I was more of a nutritionist, and then I was uh, quote unquote trying to be an influencer, and I mean that in the sense of like I'm trying to influence people through my content, not that I'm like an Instagram
Yeah.
influencer, and like an interpreter of science, because now I have a podcast and I have to explain it, and then I'm coaching coaches, and then I'm leading a team of coaches. You know what I mean? So like these things change,
Yeah.
and I've noticed that like as that's happened, I've studied more and more of this kind of stuff because it's more and more important and it's more and more interesting to me as that becomes more of my duty. So like the science of words is like the most fascinating thing to me. I love it, but I'm also into weird things, so people might not get excited about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. But it's it's from a business perspective, it's super important.
Yeah.
I think it's cool. So I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Let's see. So yeah, the study they didn't really find anything. But there are a number of other studies that this kind of links back to that say, acutely exercise generally helps sleep, like helps people sleep better. It's probably because you're tired, right? Especially if you're not used to exercising. Um, so that's kind of the take home is the sword is double-edged, where like sleeping good helps your exercise, but exercising good also helps your sleep.
It's like a continuous cycle.
Yeah.
Is there any differences with morning versus night training sessions? I always get the question like, what's the best time to train? And the only literature I really know about this is for muscle growth, I want to say. And I think they said like between 3 to 5 p.m. because it's in the afternoon.
Oh
Um,
man.
but
Yeah,
I
I've got a
know,
lot.
I've made recommendations to people like that train. I mean, shit, when I was going to school, interning and working job, I would train at like 10 p.m. Like I'd literally
Mhm.
like after my whole day, I'd train, finish at like midnight, eat a meal, pass out, try to sleep in as long as I could. Um, and a lot of people who train late, like they have insomnia, they can't sleep. And I'm like, hey, we should probably tone down because you're drinking caffeine or you're amping up your nervous system while you train, then you try to go to bed. I never had that issue, but I was also 19 when I was doing that. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I could just fall asleep like a rock. But is there any evidence to suggest one way or the other?
So uh, up until a couple years ago, there was, and it was working out in the afternoon. Like you worked out better. It just generally helped everything. But then people got a little smarter and realized that you adapt to whenever you work out. So like if you, I don't know what time you work out, but let's say you started working out at 6 a.m. Like the first month even might suck. But after that, you would be able to perform just as well as you had before if you worked out at like 3 or 5 p.m. or whatever. So there was a lot of science around like, oh, you're primed to do better in the afternoons. It'll just help as long as you can manage caffeine, which is linked to sleep. But then it's kind of like, oh no, you kind of adapt, and it doesn't really matter for long-term performance. I think when we talk about stimulants and sleep and stuff, yeah, you have to be really careful with that.
Well, I'm sure if they took people who aren't training at all and put them in the study, they probably would adapt quicker to the afternoon training because it's not much of an adaptation. They've been awake for 8 hours. They've had 3 meals. They've been moving their joints. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But is there any reason, like, because I've heard people make the argument of like, well, wouldn't why don't want to train in the morning because cortisol kind of wakes us up. You know, morning is when we have that big cortisol spike. Cortisol kind of puts you in that fight or flight. It might be good to use that for strength training, and then you're not, cortisol goes up and then it calms down throughout the day and then you're spiking it again as you train, which I don't know if it's to that effect, but um, is there any reason that that would be beneficial? Maybe in special populations where stress or cortisol issues are prevalent?
Yeah. I mean, I'd be kind of hesitant to go down that road because I mean, cortisol spikes, but it's not like super duper high. Maybe I don't know. I kind of like, probably not.
I think it depends on that training too. I know like
Yeah, yeah,
if you're doing like a really good, just basic strength bodybuilding program, you probably don't have anything to worry about. But I've worked with people who have high stress lifestyles and they're doing like 6 days a week of like really intense CrossFit. Like they're CrossFitters, but they're not just like the recreational. Like they're actually doing local competitions and they're pretty
yeah,
badass. And in those cases, I do have the discussion of like, hey, let's have carbs in every meal. Let's make sure that you're having like a post workout shake with carbs in it right away because we just want to like keep calming you down because you're always ramped up. And
yeah,
there's people that's just their personality, like they're go, go, go and they're nonstop and they're hyped up all the time. And I think that can cause burnout after a while if you're not careful.
yeah. I definitely agree with that. And I don't know that there's a whole lot like even of research to kind of link like high cortisol with stress response with training adaptations. Like it's just not. I just think there's not that much out there. So there's definitely a gap there.
Yeah, it'd be a hard study to even do, honestly, because you got to find the right people. Um,
Yeah, the studies where you have to screen before you do anything. So, like a lot of the genetic studies, like say we're doing a caffeine metabolism study, like we have to screen your genetics and then like do the study, take longer and are harder to kind of get people for.
mm,
So,
Um, one question I do have on this one that isn't related to training is just nutrition's effect. Like I think it's something that we might as well bring up since we're talking about sleep so much in this podcast. But is there, I've heard multiple things. I've heard that it doesn't matter. Like if you're in a deficit for a long time, you're going to probably start having sleep issues. But I don't necessarily think that's about nutrient timing or anything like that. You're fatigued from the diet, and stress response
yeah.
is going up. But I've heard people make the claim of, which would make sense, like, have most of your carbs in the afternoon because, you get that like kind of carb coma, that sleepy effect when you shift into parasympathetic mode. I've also heard people say the opposite. And I want to say there was research that came out not too long ago that, I don't know if it was Greg Potter or the other lady I interviewed, that actually brought up saying the complete opposite, like having carbs in the morning and then actually having a higher protein fat meal before bed to help sleep. But do you know of any recommendations for macros or meal timing or really anything, or is it kind of just up in the air right now?
So it's both ways, and I think from my reading of the literature, both ways are correct. You just have to determine, and this is a super easy experiment to do on yourself, if carbs like promote sleep or if they make you stay up or kind of like you can't sleep with them, which is, I mean, most people probably already know that. Like I know that if I have a bunch of carbs, I'm gonna get a little sleepy and that's okay. So I can use it to my advantage. Whereas some people may be the opposite. And then they would say, all right, well, maybe high fat helps me sleep. Or maybe there's like no effect at all. So that's something you could totally test with you or your clients or whoever, and whichever way helps, I would go with.
That makes sense. It's pretty
Yeah,
individual.
yeah,
And I'm the same way. Like I have a, one of my bigger carb meals at night and it knocks me out. Like I'm, I'm
yeah,
down like a rock. But then again, like I basically eat carbs in every single meal. So it's hard for me
yeah,
to even make a decision of like which one's better for me. So until I get deep into this cut, I won't be able to say.
yeah. I'm settling right around like 2,500 calories, and it's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, awesome. This has been good, man. Do you have anything else to add on either of these studies?
Um, no, but I do want to touch on chronotypes because the first study adjusted for chronotypes.
Okay.
Um, so chronotypes are, you're one of three things. You're either a morning lark, you're kind of intermediate, which is 80% of the population, 70, 80% of the population, or you're a night owl. So morning larks like to get up early and go to bed early. Night owls are the opposite. And the people in between are kind of flexible, I guess, for lack of a better term. But I remember in college, I was talking to one of my clients at the time, and he was like, yeah, I always feel bad when I sleep in, and I want to get up early and be like a go-getter, and like our society is primed for like starting early is good and staying up late, honestly, just like sleeping less is good, which is not true. But I had to tell him, I made him take the quiz that I link actually in the blog. It's like auto MEQ. You can figure out your chronotype if you answer correctly or honestly. Um, but you can adapt to your chronotype such that maybe you wake up a little bit later and it's okay because you feel better. Like don't feel bad about adjusting to your chronotype or adjusting your sleep schedule, especially if it's just a couple hours. So I just wanted to touch on that because people ask me about chronotypes occasionally. So you can figure out what yours is in the blog, but then don't be afraid to adjust to it if you can, especially like now everybody's working from home.
Hmm. I think it's always important to tell people like there's all these strategies and methods and things that you can dig into and pathways, but it's always important to just constantly kind of keep your finger on that pulse of awareness just to make
Mm-hmm.
sure you're looking at your body. Because I've seen people have results that wouldn't make sense because it's not what I would predict, and then I've have other people that are extremely predictable and it's exactly what I thought would happen. So it's important to do that. But I'll link, obviously the blog will be linked in this podcast. So if you're interested in reading Brandon's interpretations, you can jump on that. That's where all the graphs and all the links are. And I'll also drop a link in the show notes of Danny's episode, Chrononutrition, Danny's article on Stronger by Science on chrononutrition, and then the test that you just mentioned. I'll put that in the show notes for you guys as well. And I recommend checking them all out. It's a really interesting topic. And I think if you're a coach or a trainer, you're just a nutrition geek, it's a fun one to dive into because as you dig into chrononutrition, you start almost feeling like it's defying the rule of calories in versus calories out. And it's not completely, but for a long time, it was like nutrient timing does not matter. Just hit your calories, right? And then this comes out and you're like, or does it matter? And then it kind of throws in that wrench. But again, I think this is one of those things too, where like if you're obese, have never tracked macros, you have no good habits, like don't worry about chrononutrition. It's not going to work. But if you're an elite
Right.
nutrition-y and you've been dieting and you're focused on this stuff, I think it's worth paying attention to or considering, or if it works with your schedule. One of the interesting things, the last thing I'll say, was that when they were talking about time restricted feeding in the article, and me and Danny talked about it on the podcast, was that most people think of time restricted feeding as an intermittent fasting protocol where I skip breakfast, right? And then I have most of my calories in the afternoon, but they actually kind of flipped it around, and these research studies showed a bigger benefit to waking up, eating your biggest meal of the day, and having smaller meals throughout the day, and then stopping your eating at around 5 or 6 p.m., which also goes against the whole thing of it, like eating before bed causes you to gain fat, which was like a myth, and then people defied that and were like, no, it doesn't matter. And this comes, so it's like it's one of those ones that's like, well, maybe, and they're poking the bear. So if you're into this stuff, I do recommend checking it out. It's a fun topic.
Yeah. Research is always evolving, right? So like we may figure something out in a couple of years that kind of starts to tilt what we believe or what we think. And you just have to kind of be open to when that happens. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Well, all right, man, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you again for being on the podcast. I'm going to link Brandon's Instagram, the blog, all the content I mentioned in the description. So go check those out. Go give him a follow. He did a full series on these topics as well on his Instagram, which is basically like a weekly thing, right?
Yeah, I pick up a topic each week, basically.
Yeah. So if you want a lot of informative infographics, go check that out there. And until next time.